We're with our guest, Alex Epstein. He is the author of Fossil Future. Alex, talking about the nature of climate change and the role of fossil fuels and so on, I think I'm not being exaggerating when I say those, perhaps on the other side of the argument, that want to eliminate immediately all fossil fuels tomorrow, are fairly apocalyptic in their language. And they're basically saying that civilization won't exist in the near future if we continue to pour these fossil fuels into our atmosphere. So really, I guess I'd love for you to articulate what you see as the biggest threat to human civilization on your side of the argument.
Well, just to quickly address the view that it's apocalyptic, which is a view we hear a lot. I think it's very important. This is another example of what mainstream climate science is finding is being totally distorted by various institutions that are claiming to speak for mainstream science. Because if you look at the mainstream science does not at all indicate apocalypse, even in terms of the kinds of climate impacts it forecasts, let alone if you factor in our ability to adapt to and master climate. So it's just very important for people to know that believing in, quote, climate change or climate impact is not at all the same as believing in climate apocalypse. And we need to stop packaging those together. So in terms of what are the biggest threats, this is always something that you can't really know. And it's important that you can't really know it because, for example, like we saw with a pandemic, you can have a very damaging pandemic of a, novel coronavirus. That wasn't on people's minds. I mean, on my mind was things like antibiotic resistance and that kind of thing. And that's a big one. But in general, what you want, you can't predict the nature of the problems really at all. And it's certainly hard for us to know as non-experts in most fields what the biggest problems will be. But you can know that the more capability you have as a society, and that's really manifested in how good and versatile an economy you have, the more you have that, the more you can deal with anything. So if you have a new virus that's, let's say, even more dangerous than COVID, well, at least you can quickly try to come up with, different forms of safe vaccination, and you can come up with therapeutics, and you can do all sorts of things. Whereas if you're poor, you can't do any of that. And one of the terrible things about the climate apocalypse movement is that it's saying we're afraid of this particular threat, which turns out to be just incredibly exaggerated, but their means of solving the threat is to reduce dramatically the availability of energy, which is the thing that powers our economy, which then if we don't have energy, we can't be safe from even climate. So we can't even be safe from a normal climate, let alone any kind of new challenges, but you also can't be safe from all the other unforeseeable types of things. So in a sense, the biggest threat I see is the climate catastrophe movement because they're undercutting our energy, which then undercuts our economy, which then makes us vulnerable to everything.
And let's take this further. I'm sure you've got something to say about developing countries and their need for fuel and how this kind of argument that you're arguing against impacts them.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you brought that up. So it's just so important for us to recognize if we're in the I'm in the United States, you're in Canada, we're just so incredibly wealthy compared to the rest of the world. And, just to give you a sense in energy terms, which is very much correlated with wealth because energy powers the machines that allow us to be productive and prosperous versus, poor. So, and endangered by nature all the time. So we have about 3 billion people using less electricity than a typical North American refrigerator does. So you just think about that. That's all the electricity you get. And then we have 6 billion people who use an amount of energy that we would totally consider unacceptable, like that you and I and anyone watching this in North America would consider unacceptable. And they have a standard of living that we would consider unacceptable. So if you recognize most of the world is energy poor, and energy is so beneficial to what I call human flourishing, our ability to live long, healthy, opportunity-filled lives, then you have to think of energy as we need way more of it. Not we have enough. Like we have enough is a really unfair perspective to have when so many people are really poor.
Indeed. We're going to continue with our guest, Alex Epstein. He's the author of Fossil Future. I've got that right. Fossil Future?
You got it.
Okay.
You got it.
We've got another segment coming up. I really want to talk about, some of the things that are going on with renewables in North America. We've got the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. We've got these massive investments in electric vehicle plants here in Canada. Love to get your perspective on it, but I want to give you a full opportunity. So we're going to take our commercial break right now. We'll be back with our guest after these messages.